Hello and welcome to my presentation, Surviving and Thriving, Using Positive Thoughts to Change Your Outlook and Reality. My name is Maria Easterling and I am an elementary school teacher at the second largest school district in the United States. I have over 30 years of experience, mostly in early childhood grades, pre-K through second grade. I currently teach third grade math, science, and social studies, and Spanish. Along with a bachelor's degree, I currently hold a master's degree and am pursuing a specialist degree at the University of West Georgia. I've been a national board certified teacher early childhood generalist since 2002, and I'm currently working on maintenance of certification. The purpose of this presentation is to assist educators in identifying strategies they can use with students, particularly those that have low self-esteem. Childhood can be a magical time or it can be traumatic. And while many children do not have the option of leaving emotionally abusive homes, as educators, we can help arm them with powerful tools that will help them thrive in spite of their harsh environments. Starting out, we want to look at understanding how childhood development theories shape our future selves. Early childhood experiences have a direct link to how people react and act later on in life. Our experiences as children shape how we think, feel, and relate to others and ourselves. When these experiences are good ones, adults tend to be confident, successful, and secure in their sense of worth and identity. Freud really touches upon this when he speaks about how unresolved childhood issues can infiltrate and continue into adulthood and become evident in how adults react to different situations later in life. As teachers, we really want to foster trust and support. Bandura's social learning theory and vicarious reinforcement states that individuals are more likely to adopt behaviors they see rewarded and avoid those that result in punishment. When children's needs are met and they encounter consistent support from trusted adults, even if they're not their parents, they tend to grow up to be adults that are secure and confident. This matters. Childhood that includes strong feelings of belonging is crucial to adults that feel secure in their identity. And this, we can go back to Fisher's dynamic structuralism. We also hold the belief that children's level of thinking has to do with the fit between the child and their environment, not just the child alone. As teachers, we have a duty to create environments that foster this type of feeling of belongingness so that our students can thrive in those environments. We also know that toxic stress that is experienced in childhood can have a significant negative impact on these children as they become adults. So I wanted to highlight two of the early childhood theories and the significance to the case studies that we'll be looking at today. First and foremost, Bandura and his social learning theory, and particularly vicarious reinforcement, which states that students acquire new behaviors simply by watching a model that is reinforced. We also want to look at self-efficacy. Many children may have all the necessary skills for mastering a task, but if they do not feel or perceive themselves as capable of actually participating in these tasks effectively or using these skills effectively, they may fail, or even worse, they may not even attempt the task. Also prominent in these two case studies is Vygotsky and his theories of social interaction and language, which also coincide with children's ability to find their place socially and the importance, particularly of language, both speech and intonation, in that search for acceptance. Vygotsky believed that children talk to themselves in order to solve problems or clarify their thoughts. If children are exposed to negative speak, whether it's from their parents, their teachers, or any other environment, that is the language or the speech that they internalize to use with themselves. And I will highlight later in one of our case studies how that is evident. But first, case study number one, which I named I Can't, I'm Stupid, is based on my student who I have adopted the name Sarah as a pseudonym. Sarah turned 8 in the spring of 2025, which makes her a fairly young third grader. She is an average student and she is well liked among her peers. For a little bit of background, Sarah lives with both her parents and her younger brother, who is in first grade. And her father is often on tour as he is a musician in a well known band. When he's on tour, Sarah feels sad and she misses him terribly. But she is in the care of her mother, who she loves very much, and her mother becomes the primary caretaker for the family and the household while he is gone. As I observed Sarah the first few weeks of school, Sarah is a very social little girl, and her interactions with her peers often takes precedence over any attention that she pays in class. And this behavior has left her often confused about assignments or the topics that are being covered in class. So, our call to action. As I said before, Sarah is one of the kindest, most empathetic students that I have had in my teaching career. But these social interactions with her peers during class time left her confused about assignments. And over the course of the first few weeks of school, I often redirected Sarah to go back to work and focus on what she was doing, but I had very limited success in that. The breaking point, or I guess the motivator for choosing Sarah as one of my case studies, happened early on in the year in late August. And we were working on a math lesson. And I noticed that Sarah, instead of working at her desk, she had her head down and she looked completely defeated. When I looked at her workbook, it was mostly blank. And I asked her to follow me back to my desk so I could speak to her and kind of probed a little bit to see why she wasn't working, if she felt sick or if she was tired or if she was upset about something. And after a couple of these questions, she just burst out with, "I'm stupid, and that's why I'm not completing my work." After I got over the initial shock, we went on to have a conversation where I kind of probed a little bit further to see if she had heard that statement from someone or if why she would come to that conclusion about herself. And I found that it was something that she believed, and she felt that is if she had difficulty completing an assignment, it was because she was stupid. And after hearing this assessment, I realized that this was not just concerning to me, but something that she was clearly struggling with and was affecting her emotionally. And it was starting to affect her academically as well. So we began to think about cultivating new thinking patterns and using positive strategies that she already had and moving forward and applying those to our targeted behavior. So, one of the first things that I talked to her about, and I've thought of Bandura's theories, was to ask her to to tell her voice, I'm sorry, in her head, that when it started to tell her she was stupid, to just shut up because it was a lie. And when I told her that, her eyes kind of got big. Teacher saying to shut up, telling a student to tell a voice to shut up, but it got her to giggle, and I felt like that was a very positive beginning to our conversation. Also, thinking about Vygotsky, I asked her to think about what things that she was really good at, and she came up with dancing and being a good friend. And when I asked her what made her a good dancer, she talked about observing her dance teacher, and practicing those moves until she got them down pat. And as related to being a good friend, she spoke about how she listened to her friends and she was always kind, especially when they were upset. So my focus was utilizing something that she was already familiar with and applying it to the targeted behavior, which was paying attention in class and changing really her perception of herself. So I asked her if she could use any of these skills, the observation and the listening skills within the classroom. And she said that she could pay attention and practice her math in order to improve her abilities in class. The biggest thing was the kindness to self. And so we also talked about how she could be kind to herself, especially when she was upset, when she didn't understand something, or when she wasn't doing well. And she said, and I quote, "I can be kind just like I am when my friends feel bad and say nice things to myself." So I also thought I was very intuitive of her. So as we put these um, strategies into place, I would check in with her every morning, thumbs up, something very subliminal, so the other students wouldn't be called, it wouldn't cause any attention to the other students. And over the progress of, or the elapsed time of about a week, 2 weeks, I began to see very encouraging differences in Sarah's behavior and her demeanor, as how she perceived herself. One ways that she showed progress was actually being successful at the task that she was putting effort forth on. And because she was getting consistent success, she started to see that she was more than capable. And that helped change the perception that she had about herself. And it began to impact the performance on tasks that prior to the quote unquote intervention, she would have met with negativity and frustration and feeling overwhelmed with little or no success. As time progressed, whenever she had a setback, her response was, "Nope, I'm learning. I'm getting it. I'm working on it." And her new mantra, instead of "I'm stupid," was "I'm smart." And when she encounters a setback now, the first words out of her mouth are, "Mistakes are great ways to learn. I'm getting better. I'm learning." So I saw all of these as very positive changes. The reason I targeted Sarah for this case study was because a lot of the feelings that she expressed made reminded me of myself at that age. So the second case study, "You Can't and You Won't," is based on me. I'm 52 years old. I've been an elementary school teacher for over 30 years, and my husband and I just became empty nesters as we just dropped off our youngest child um, to start the university. Our family has been going through a lot of big changes, big life changes, which are completely normal. Not only did our youngest child go away to college, but I also began back graduate school, and it's very different from how I left it 25 years ago. But because I survived a very dysfunctional childhood that was marred by a very volatile marriage between my parents and a lot of emotional and physical abuse, this these changes really began to bring back a lot of those damaging interactions that left me with no real sense of identity or worth as a child. And one of my own observations in my own case is that I find myself ruminating on negative aspects of events, and that starts to fuel a lot of negative self talk and thoughts, just like Sarah exhibited in class. So this behavior was beginning to affect me in all areas of my life. And the frequency of those negative ruminations was beginning to affect my ability to think clearly, as well as invading parts of my life that can usually bring me joy. So, like Sarah, I needed to have a call to action. And the constant negative response from my parents when I was going through normal life milestones made me begin to anticipate that negative response from them so that I could formulate my own response or a plan of action so that I could move forward. And this is something that I did as a very young child all through my adolescence. These negative experiences, while terrible, also made me very resilient and thoughtful and empathetic and determined and hardworking and very observant. And despite the many outbursts that were directed to me or directed at me when I was particularly an adolescent, I made very different choices for myself and my family, particularly in parenting my own children. So, conversation, even with myself, going back to Vygotsky and that children speak to themselves to work through problems, my voice, my internal voice, my inner voice was always very negative. So, in the past, I have made several attempts to change or curtail this habit of ruminating. And where I have had periods where I was very successful, I've lacked consistency in maintaining those replacement behaviors over extended periods of time. I also find that I revert back to this type of behavior when I'm stressed or emotional or frustrated. And as a result, I've seen an increase in those ruminations with these very big life changes that my family has been going through in the last few months. So I began to cultivate new thinking patterns through positive strategies for myself. And one of the first things that I did was finding triggers. And this was brought about by one of the articles that I began to research how different therapists and different psychologists help their clients or participants in studies look at what kind of triggers set off those ruminating negative thoughts. And so I noticed that I decided that what I would do was track those triggers and those responses on a calendar with a brief description of the replacement thought. So, not necessarily focusing on the trigger as much, but when I was triggered, what my replacement thought was going to be. And I drew back to that Vygotsky's theory of language to really solidify the type of appropriate and positive language that I needed to replace indifference or as a challenge to those negative self talk. I created goals, much like Sarah, goals that would work with the things that I'm already good at. So, as I said, I was observant. I can identify and track those triggers. I can replace those negative thoughts with positive language. I chose to journal every night and ending with going through and finishing with something I was grateful for. So that was the last thought in my head before I went to bed. And then planning ahead to complete tasks early so that I would avoid adding stress to myself, which contributes to those triggers. So by utilizing things that already work, I found that the planning and journaling was very easy to commit to because those are things that I do anyway. But I found that the monitoring, the tracking of the triggers and responses was tedious and it caused more stress when I felt I had forgotten to mark on the calendar. So in taking a page from Sarah's playbook, the kindness to myself was a very big component of my project. And so I chose to switch the tracking to being mindful of those triggers instead of actually marking them on a calendar. And just the fact that I did that really helped reduce the amount of stress, which helped reduce the amount of triggers. I made sure to document those events in my journaling activity every evening, but I noticed that as I was doing this consistently, that journal kind of became a replacement and it helped put my thoughts in better perspective so I could analyze any improvement that I saw. So the changes that I saw after a few weeks of this very consistent and mindful practice, I found that the biggest takeaway for me was the ability to shift from that targeted marking of the triggers and count on the calendar and the response. Rather than seeing that as a failure, I saw that as a huge positive, a huge success, because I was able to identify that it was something that was causing me more harm than good. And I was able to shift my behavior into something that was already working and my mindset about it. I found that regardless of what my childhood brought, I moved forward and I used those negative experiences to be vigilant of those same behaviors in my students. And that's what propelled me really to choose Sarah because I recognized that behavior in myself as she did it. So that interaction with her really helped challenge me into doing something to prove that I was successful, no matter how tired or how difficult it would be. And so I have been very consistent, even after the quote unquote experiment time has passed, to committing to that journaling and keeping myself updated with things to do lists to keep me accountable. And so personal growth isn't just measured in great successes. For me, in this task, turning away from those behaviors and attitudes that diminished my mental health and ability to experience joy has helped me actively pursue ways to decrease that damage caused by those negative childhood experiences. So, now some similarities between the case studies. Both of us had negative views of our abilities because of experienced or perceived failures. And we both felt that those negative views were not helpful in moving us forward into success. Both of our subjects, myself and Sarah, were triggered by feeling emotional or tired or frustrated. And these triggers brought on those negative self talk and thoughts and curtailed success. So the fact that we were able to identify those triggers and move forward was really something. And then when given that simple, specific, positive behavior to replace those negative thoughts, we showed more signs of resiliency, more willingness to work towards success. And we were not necessarily easily triggered by setbacks as we would have been prior to that. Of course, there are some differences. Sarah's a child. She's just developing her modes of coping and discovering that failures don't define her. And she's learning that she's capable at a very young age. And I'm really happy that I was able to kind of help her guide her into that. Myself, as a middle-aged woman with that kind of background, that constant negative criticism and judgment really reinforced those negative thoughts, and that negative self-talk became my inner voice. For Sarah, the trigger that is that when she feels that something is too challenging, she thinks that she can't do it. For me, the triggers are time constraints or feeling overwhelmed at the amount of things that need to be completed, and that can trigger those negative thoughts. And then for the replacement behavior, Sarah remembered that her skills and strategies from other successes that she's had could be applied into different areas, particularly in this case, mathematical tasks. For me, being vigilant of that negative self talk requires more thought and consistent effort, but I am getting there. So, what does this mean for you? As you move forward and make it work for you, what are some of the things that you want to change? Why do you want to change them? How will you determine what success or change looks like? What steps will you develop to create the change that you desire? Will you research these different methods and strategies and look at their success rates? Will you talk with friends? What methods or strategies will you feel will be easy to implement and maintain for your lifestyle and your preferences? Also, how long do you plan to implement these new strategies? Is it until the behavior is curtailed or further on? How will you keep yourself accountable? And how will you analyze your progress? And most importantly, how will you celebrate those moments of clarity and success so that you feel motivated to continue? Any time that we find a way forward is progress. And so, some helpful tips as you begin your own journey. I found that journaling my observations really helped pinpoint behaviors that I wanted to target. I found that researching, there's so much available online, both pseudoscience and actual research projects that have been published that will help you guide your journey, help you find the strategies that will work for you to implement, or give you resources to learn more so that you can make those decisions. I would suggest with small, attainable goals. Maybe there's a lot of things that you want to change, but starting with small, attainable goals and meeting those goals successfully will encourage you to make even more positive changes. Keeping yourself accountable, but being flexible when you need to shift directions. And for me, this was key to not see that lack of progress in the calendar marking as a failure, but really it was a progress, it was a success. So keeping that in mind, that flexibility is key. And I cannot stress enough celebrating those small successes and being grateful for the failures. Like Sarah says, mistakes are ways of learning, and those successes and failures will bring different opportunities that will help you reflect on your journey and your goal. So, as I wrap up my presentation, I want you to think about how changing the way that we think, we always open ourselves to opportunities to grow. And I thank you for your time and your interest. The remaining slides are the references for case study number 1 and study number 2, in case you want to look into some of the research that I looked at for myself. Thank you for your time and your interest.